First, I just want to open the floor. If anybody has particulars, did anything in particular stand out for anybody? You can just like, I don't know how to do the whole like screen hand raising, but if you want to do like an actual hand raise, I can like look around. But did anything really like stand out for anybody in that first module that they'd want to like, hey, this was interesting to me? Otherwise, we'll kind of walk through a little bit by little bit. Andrew, you want to go for it?
Sure. I've only gotten through, I think, the first 5 parts, but the one that really spoke to me was the self-awareness. Literally, like when I read through that whole section, I was like, I felt like I've experienced all of this from like start to finish. And it was like an evolving process. Like it took like, because I said I was like in a PTA for about like 5 years, and a lot of aspects now still apply like in PT school because it's a shift in like how I have to like kind of use certain things for physical therapy. But the part about the weaknesses is really what stood out to me. It's something that took a lot of time, like how it's like experience, like your patience and like feedback from your peers and mentors. And I feel like that's something I'm just very blunt about because like I'll ask for the feedback because it's one of those things like the faster you know, the faster you can adapt. And I feel like in terms of strengths, like that's what I like is I like the feedback because then I know how to make those adjustments on the fly in order to either give better care or be better participant because we had like a lot of group work for my semester this year, and that was one of those things. It's like to get our group work done a little better and like flow a little easier because we had some like minor difficulties in the beginning, but like that kind of feedback made a huge difference.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. Yeah, it's interesting. The reason I wrote that is because sometimes you don't realize your strengths and weaknesses until they start getting pointed out for you. Sometimes for me, that was very much my patients pointing that out. They're like, "Man, you gave me a home exercise program about 4 weeks ago, and you haven't updated it in about 4 weeks. So what am I supposed to be doing at home?" You know, like, or maybe just somebody was a little bit frustrated because they're not quite understanding an exercise or not quite understanding like the reason for it. And I was like, oh yeah, I didn't really like educate. I didn't really explain some of these things. So I think very quickly, some of you new grads will understand that you'll get your weaknesses pointed out to you very quickly. Hopefully it's in like a kind setting like you're talking about, like if you get it from peers, mentors, from CIs, from somebody who is willing to give you a kind amount of feedback in a nice way. But sometimes you guys will notice that you'll get it from your patients. So I think one of the things that I would advise people early on is like when you start hearing some of the same comments like from patients or like from different people, like take note of it. Like this is something I really might need to work on a little bit and might need to like zero in on. But strengths, I feel like we're all pretty aware of like what we're good at. And then even that though tends to like develop and change over time. So that's kind of like an interesting thing as well. So did anybody else have any comments about that? You can just unmute yourself if anybody else have anything that jumped out in that self-awareness package, because that was like a big part. And I would say that's kind of like the main point of this context, like our context. So anybody else have anything as far as that self-awareness section went?
So I think for me in that situation, just like being self-aware as my first couple weeks of like just treating on my own, I was really concerned like during the evals of making sure that I'm getting a good subjective history, but like I want to do as many tests as I can do, make sure we're getting strength, range of motion, balance, the whole shebang. And I realized actually there was this one patient in particular who I just discharged. And I was really sad and I did cry. But she was just like her pain came about after like losing her spouse. And like in that evaluation was when I realized like I was trying to like let's get going, like let's start doing things just to really slow down, like let the patient kind of lead you. There's always like time to do more tests the next time you see them, but just sitting and listening is just as important as everything else we're going to do with them. So I think for me, it was letting go of that almost like hyper productivity mindset. I'm like, I have to have the best, most beautiful, detailed eval all the time. And now I'm like, it's fine. So just like really being aware of when I'm trying to lead as opposed to letting the patient lead. And I've seen just from other patients that I've had with similar like chronic pain stuff or other issues going on outside of their physical pain, to really just like basically shut up and listen. And also see how like all of that, like the external factors are really impacting their pain or what they're doing, and how like if I'm listening closely, I can help educate them, etc. So I think for me that self-awareness was like kind of, it's like a dance, you know, you got to let the other person lead, but you're doing it together. So that was something that really stood out to me about that. um yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so true. I think if you kind of dive a little deeper too, it's kind of figuring out. So there is a balance there, right? Productivity and diagnostics versus hearing like what somebody's subjective is. And I think that's like one of the hardest things in the beginning, right? How do I figure out this balance? I really need to know what's going on with this person so I get them better faster. But at the same time, yeah, like we need that subjective background. So spending time in that. The one thing I had to ask myself a couple of different times, so like, hey, I have to get all these tests and measures and get all this, you know, get all the measurements and everything that that I need for a good case. Sometimes you have to sit back and ask yourself what you really, really need. So like the necessities. So what's necessary versus what is expected of me. And we kind like, basically, what are those expectations? Some of us come from, hey, I had a clinical rotation where objective measure was everything, or the opposite. I've had a couple students where like, I came from a place they didn't give a rip about objective measures. And so we basically just did a short subjective. We did a little testing. And we're like, oh, probably know what's going on here. So hopefully with this course, we talk a little bit more about diagnostics, but at the same time, balancing that with really getting to know your patients. So what about ourselves makes us feel like I have to have A, B, C, and D in my objective because it's something I believe that I need, if that makes sense. Like basically what expectations are you holding for yourself? I have to have 20 tests and measures, or I have to have these specific ones. Or is it actually, hey, I need these 5 for sure. Like I need to really figure out what this is going on here. But then with the patient in front of me, because everybody's different, do I need to spend a little bit more time listening as well? We just had a patient yesterday who, I mean, all she needed was me to sit and listen and hear her and see her and understand that she had been to 8 different neurologists. They have no clue what's going on with her. She needed somebody to understand that she's been looking for a PT place for a long time and everybody's treating her like a disabled person and she just wants to be treated like a human being. So I really needed some tests and measures because this lady has a lot going on and a lot that's neurological that's a little outside the box. If the doctors at Mayo Clinic don't know what's going on with her, what am I doing with her? So I did want a little bit of tests and measures, but in that moment, she needed me to like sit and listen and realize that like, hey, I've been eight neurologists and I really just need help moving a little bit better. So same thing, like how do you figure out that balance? I think it's just a matter of knowing that person in front of you. One of the things in the last module that we'll talk about is more of that social IQ, emotional IQ. What is the person in front of you doing or saying that makes you think like, I can hurry them up a little bit because they're just telling stories. Like we've all had those talkers, right? Who are they just want to keep talking. Or is it somebody that emotionally, hey, my spouse just died and I need somebody to hear that and understand that that's when my pain started. I had one patient who, she could not identify when her pain started. It was migraines, and she was dealing with migraines, neck pain, all this other stuff. And we did a couple of VOR tests and visual tests in the beginning to see what was going on with her eyes. And she started like thinking back to what was going on. And here, some of her pain started when she started losing her eyesight. Had totally forgotten about that. She was just like, I got migraines and neck pain, but she was losing her eyesight, had to get a seeing eye dog, all this different stuff. And what happened was eventually that dog passed away and all this pain sprung up. So the loss of her dog was part of it too. So it's kind of like, my gosh, I need some objective measures. And sometimes your objective measures are going to lead to, hey, I need to do a little bit more subjective questioning. And all of it comes down to like better questions. So objectives, we need them. And then better questions, we need those too. So little by little, if you guys have questions about that balance, maybe we can talk through that a little bit too. So cool. All right. Anybody else have anything else from that like self-awareness section?
I think for me, there were a couple of things that resonated. Like one thing that I just thought about as y'all were talking about those kind of patient cases, like it happened to me last night, actually. My last patient of the day, he's 16. He's about 3.5 months post-op from his ACL reconstruction, and he tore it at the end of the soccer season. And I was just casually like talking about soccer. His like cousin, I've been treating his cousin and like discharged her from the same injury. And I was just like, oh, like, are you wanting to play next year? Like, kind of what's your game plan? When does soccer season start? And just like nonchalantly talking about it. And then like I like turned and looked at him, and he was like, his like face was in his shirt, and I was like, "Are you okay? Like, was it one of the exercises?" And he like sat down, and he was like, "Oh man, it's just hard to talk about soccer right now. Like, it's a really hard thing." He's like, "All my friends play, and like that's all they want to talk about." And he's like, "It's just really hard." And like, it's one of those where it took me back because I'm like, I think of this dude like, I mean, he's a high school, 16, 17-year-old guy. Like, he's an athlete. Like, I take it as like, hey, like, let's work out. Like, let's get you back to soccer. And like, for him, it's like, there's this huge trauma attached to his injury. And it's like taking an emotional toll on him. And so it was like, we took like 20 minutes out of his session to just kind of sit and talk and like figure out like what I need to do for him. Do we need to start doing soccer stuff? Should we wait on doing soccer stuff? Like, what would help him? And I think that just, it kind of took me out of my bubble of like, let's exercise, let's work out, let's get you back to your sport. And like this whole big piece of these injuries and like what they're going through on the back end. Cause I've been seeing him for 3.5 months and this has never happened before. And it just like snapped out of nowhere, and it was just like kind of took me back. And I think it's just ties into the self-awareness of like knowing, like trying to understand where our patients are. And I guess it also ties into some of the other things with empathy and compassion of like understanding that it's a bigger picture than, I think it was in like the first module, like this isn't just like an ACL, like this is a human being who had an injury that ended their soccer season, and like it meant the world to them, and they're like on this long journey back. Like, it's not, oh, I sprained my ankle. It's like, no, this is like 9 months to a year to get you back where you are. So that like really resonated with me last night. And then on the other end, like self-awareness for me too, that I'm trying to think of recently is like my role like in the ecosystem of this patient. Like you mentioned earlier about like the military people who have all these different providers, all these different like areas where they're doing things. And it's like, what is my role? Like, does this person need me to just like give them a program to manage, or do they need me to like write them an entire workout program and like work with them very in depth, or do they just want me as a reference? And so it's like figuring out where I play a role in that as well is something I've been navigating a lot lately, because some people do just want you to give them some exercises and like let them do their own thing and then like check in. And some people want you to be that kind of, I guess, like the person guiding the ship a little bit more.